without further ado, a big hand for Byron Matthews, CEO of Miller Heiman.
Hey, thank you. All good. Okay, is this on? Yeah? You guys hear me okay? Yeah? How we doing? Good. All right, let's do it. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about three things. First, we're going to talk about what's going on in the world of selling and why so much change. Before we just jump into sales enablement, I think it's important to talk about the context of why is this actually the fastest growing trend in selling right now, kind of what's going on. And then how are sales organizations responding? A bit of a spoiler alert, it's sales enablement, but what's really going on, how are they responding? And then finally, as we look at what the world's best organizations are investing in, what are they doing? There's kind of four things that kind of rise to the top. And I want to talk through each one of those four things, give you something to think about as you leave. Okay, so what's going on in the world of selling? You know, some of this is really obvious to all of us. There's a lot of change going on the buyer side. And yes, that change in the buyer side, which I'll talk briefly about, causes a lot of change in sales organizations. And from Miller Heiman perspective, we deal with 4,000 to 5,000 clients a year globally. We have never seen so much change. So we certainly feel it from our clients' perspective. They are investing in change. They're making a lot of change inside their organization. And obviously that's because buyers are changing. But there's also some stuff going on in the overall marketplace that's causing change too. I won't spend a lot of time on this. But there are some things going on that is putting pressure on selling organizations. You know, for one, obviously digital distribution, completely changing business models, right? Supply chains are changing. There's new players, technologies allowing for collaboration in a new way that's creating a lot of impact to how sellers sell. That's kind of an obvious one. The second one is urbanization, and especially for our global clients. You know that 65 million people a year are living now in urban cities. So 65 million people are gravitating towards urban lifestyle, mostly in emerging economies. So think about that. That's like, I'm from Chicago, so I'll do this. That's 7 new Chicagos every single year. All right, think about that centralization in urbanization and population. Well, to be honest, if you are selling globally, it's much different when you're actually selling inside of an urban population. There's a lot more competition, there's pricing, there's a lot of things to think about, local competitors. It's causing a lot of anxiety, if you will, with some of our global clients and some of the global sales organizations out there. Productivity, the aging workforce. So we know this to be true. There's going to be less people in the labor market in the next 50 years than there were in the last 50 years, right? Productivity requires labor. So if labor market's going down, that means it's going to increase the pressure on efficiency and productivity. And so there's quite a bit of impact as it relates to need to sell more. You need to get more out of what we do. And then finally, invisible sector boundaries. I mean, there's tons of examples here. Just with a client a couple of weeks ago in Australia, a telecommunications company that is now, they're entering in the healthcare space, right? So these very clean boundaries that happen in industries are starting to get broken down. Companies are starting to compete cross sectors. Now, partially because of the first thing up there. But again, that impacts selling organizations. That impacts the sophistication of what's required of a seller in that environment. So these are just important kind of macro things as it relates to why selling organizations are changing and why it's harder for them. Now, this is the stuff that we all know about. You know, the buyers changing, okay? Some basic stuff. 23%, we had this big buyer study where we go out and study the preferences of buyers, and I think it reconfirmed what we all know to be true, right? Buyers are engaging us less, right? Engaging sellers less. 23% of buyers actually think of salespeople as the primary source of information. Like that was totally different 10 years ago. I think we can all agree on that. 20 years ago, it was about providing information as a seller. Now it's about providing inspiration. It's totally different. It's a different type of engagement model. So buyers are completely different. The number of buyers, and we did this study now, it's in complex sale, there's up to 6.4%, or 6.4 buyers in every complex sale. So there's more people involved, right? There's more processes involved when there's more people, which obviously mean there's oftentimes more politics involved in decision making, which makes it harder to navigate all that. So complex selling has just become a lot more difficult. Now, part of that same study we wanted to look at engagement. So I guess 23% of buyers only look to a seller as a primary source of information. But when are they engaging sellers? Is it upfront to understand needs and have these great discussions around their concept and what's going on? Not so much, right? 70% wait until after they have fully defined needs. 44% wait until they've identified their solution, and 20% just to lock down the details. So that just means that the level of engagement is much, much lower than it ever has been. So again, it goes back to this, not about information, it's about inspiration. Your at-bats, your number of opportunities to engage a buyer are a lot less than it ever has been because they're obviously more informed than they ever has been. Now, does it mean they're better informed? It means they're more informed. And so that's a big change on the buyer side in terms of the dynamics and the capabilities now required of a selling organization.
Can I ask you a question?
Well, sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go for it. I like it.
This is such interesting statistics.
Yeah, okay, good.
Where do they come from?
Oh, good question.
What I
I
know
just made them up.
doesn't matter.
I was really hoping no one would ask that question. Damn it. No, she asked where does the information come from. So Miller Heiman Group, we purchased a business that operates separately called CSO Insights, and its entire purpose and charter is research. So it conducts studies every single year on a variety of different things, and what we decided that would be most important recently is to do a big study on our buyers and what's going on in the world of buying. So that's where this data is coming from.
So what I mean is, what type of buyers? Across every.
Oh, yeah. So absolutely. So across industry and geographies as well. Okay, good question. Feel free to jump in. Okay, where was I? Sorry, my fault. Oh, yeah, but here's the good news, right? So in that same study, we were asking about engagement, and we were like, that seems like a really bad news that people are just engaging us a lot less. Is there any good news in it? And there is good news. 90% of buyers will say, yeah, you know what, I will engage you if a scenario makes sense, if it's really risky to us, right? If the stakes are high in this decision. Now this might be like, well, yeah, that totally makes sense. But it's interesting and really important to understand, right? If it's risky for them, it's complex, it's new, they engage you more. That needs to be in the mindset of the seller when you do engage. And so it changes the behaviors of sellers. And that sophistication and that understanding needs to be baked inside of your sales process. Because where you understand engagement can be high, you'll operate differently. All right, and this level of sophistication is really, really important. A lot of organizations it's a one-size-fits-all in terms of how we engage. Okay, the other big thing here is that success looks different. What things used to be is you would show up, you would ask them really good questions, right? And you would get the customer's needs, and then you would pitch a solution. Or even before that, you would just show up and pitch product, right? It was product pitching, and then it kind of moved to solution selling. And I mean, I'd argue that Miller Heiman in the 70s kind of pioneered this notion, was one of the pioneers of solution selling. But that's actually not good enough anymore. Like that doesn't actually work anymore. And today, with the amount of content and the amount of information and the amount of lack of engagement, all the things we talked about earlier, you can't just show up and do that. You have to inspire. You have to actually, what we call, add perspective inside of the sales process. In that same study, where what were buyers looking for related to success and what a good engagement looked like, you can see here, providing them insights and perspective, right? Obviously, understanding their business and needs were still important, but you'll see this new trait around educating me now becoming a really, really important part of the sales process. So how are organizations responding to all this? I'm going to provide a framework for you to think about related to performance. We've taken, over many, many years now, mapped 1,700 plus organizations against a very simple framework to think about performance. It's got two dimensions to it. All right, the first is how your selling organization engages with your customer, your client. Simple way of thinking about it. Do you walk in and pitch product? You're a vendor. It's the way you think about it. That's the way you interact. Preferred supplier is you just do that and you are a preferred supplier of that product. So yes, you still pitch product and you still interact from a product lens, but you understand how your product adds value because you are a preferred supplier. You're there a lot. Those two are very different than the next step. The next step is this idea of a solution consultant, which means you show up and you ask good questions. You understand their needs. To be honest, that's where a lot of people have been trying to chase for many, many years. How do I become a good solution consultant? How do I get my salespeople to go in and really understand the needs before they just start pitching something? Okay? That's in the middle. Makes total sense. That's pervasive selling methodologies for very many years. The next two are totally different. Because the next two is not only do I understand their needs, important, but I'm adding value to them. I'm actually contributing to their business in a different way. Not just about selling my product, but in some broader and bigger way. A good example of this is Papa John's and Pepsi. Pepsi being the preferred supplier of brown sugar water for the Papa John's stores. Okay? Well, they aspired to have a different connection with Papa John's. They knew that Papa John's wanted to go to Latin America. Okay? Well, who has more demographic data than Pepsi? Maybe Coke? I don't know. They know where every single human being is and exactly where to put stores. So they went in and showed them how to think about moving into Latin America, and they partnered together on that expansion. That is a trusted partner. That is actually contributing to a level that transcends just selling a product. But that level of sophistication to go in and engage a client that way is profound. It's different. It's hard. But that is important. So think about it. 1,700 clients. We kind of mapped them on that. How do you engage? The next, and the answers are this. So when we mapped everybody, 33% of the organizations are in the middle, solution consultants. Kind of makes sense. That should be where most people are kind of at, where you get a little bit less at the top and still up to 50% of people selling product, just pitching product. Okay, I'll put this together in a second. The next dimension is, okay, I get how you connect with the client. How do you operate as a business? What does your sales process look like? Like, how do you execute as an organization? Real simple. Random process means you're just as good as the person out there, right? There is no rep process binding them together. Your reps just go out there and sell, and you're as good as that person. The next one is an informal process. That's my favorite one. It's where everything's documented. I actually have a sales process. It's got funnels. It's got stages. It's got gates. I understand what we must do. I understand what my client must do before I get to the next level. I've got playbooks. I've got content. I've got all this stuff, but no one really uses it, or not everyone uses it. So it's informal. Sometimes it's used, but it's not a formal process where you have organizational execution around a methodology, around a way of selling, where everybody operates that way. And then finally, when you actually have organizational execution around a methodology, you now can actually predict learning. You can predict things that would provide more value. So you're very analytical driven, which then you modify your process, your playbooks, your content, your steps, your activities quickly because you have the confidence of what's working because everyone's actually operating the same way. So when we mapped everybody here, this is how this distribution unfolded. You could imagine, and we would agree, that informal process would be the predominant one. I mean, everyone's striving to get this, but it's really, really hard. Okay, that's hard to do. So why is this all together? When you put the two things together, this is the distribution of companies, of those 1,700 companies. And again, I don't think anyone here would be like, that makes no sense. Everyone should be over dynamic. Informal process, solution consultant, that's really where a lot of firms are, where you aspire to have organizational execution, not quite there in the adoption. You really want your people to be really good solution consultants in front of their customers, right? And that's, again, the predominant kind of place where land. This is interesting. Here's if it's important. It's only important if, as I go that way, our company's more successful. That would make it actually important. This is interesting. So of those companies, we actually got all their metrics and their data. And what you saw is, across a couple of key metrics, as you go northeast, you get better. Shouldn't be that big of an aha. That would mean you have an organizational execution and you're strategically adding value to your client. I bet you'll be more successful. Hard to do, again, common sense, but not common practice, right? Because it's hard. Now, what does that mean? So that's the reality of kind of how we looked at a performance and why things are kind of impacting and why companies are trying to change. They're trying to change to get better process orientation, to get better execution. They're trying to change to add value inside of the sales process. We're seeing a lot of that. And given all the buyer dynamics that are going on, there's kind of three things that we're seeing companies really doubling down on. One, honestly, organizational structure. We're seeing selling models change. We're actually seeing a trend, a lot more inside sales, outside sales. Why is that? Well, if engagement is low, we've established that, doesn't mean that clients aren't engaging to learn about you. They're just not doing it through your sales organization. So you're seeing a big trend in a lot of various types of channels that connect with customers. All right? Seeing a big shift there. We're seeing, we'll talk about this later, we're seeing changes in methodology. It's not just about asking questions anymore. It's about adding value. Well, that's a different way of doing things. That Pepsi rep had to think differently, had to pull together content, had to engage differently, had to ask for a different type of meeting. That's different than just showing up and trying to understand what they need. And obviously, lots of companies are chasing subscription models, which is fun. But of course, that puts a big demand on account management discipline. So you're seeing selling models change, all right? You're also seeing a big gap in talent. As more pressures on sales organizations, talent has become an issue. We did another study, CSO Insights did, around talent. 16% of organizations think they have the right talent for the future. Quick math, that's a bunch that don't, right? So what does all that mean? That means that there's a lot of talent issues out there related to sales. I'm going to talk about that in a second in the context of this last one. The fastest growing trend that we see going on is sales enablement. Sales enablement, when people ask, well, why is it going on? Why did you guys write a book on that? I mean, geez. Because it is this immense trend that's happening. All right, people are trying to understand how we're going to sophisticate our business. How are we going to get them to become value drivers? How do we get organizational execution? Sales ops is not the answer. Sales ops supports that for sure. For sure, it does. It's a big part of that. But it's not the only answer, right? It's this new cross-functional discipline is really charged with closing this gap. Closing the gap that buyers are getting better at buying faster than sellers are getting better at selling. That gap is real. All of our data would suggest that. Sales enablement is that function that's trying to close that gap. Okay, so what is sales enablement? Here's one way of looking at it. This little equation here. Think of it very simply as it's the effectiveness and the efficiency of the stuff that goes through your pipeline or your funnel. It's creating effectiveness and efficiency of what goes in. How do you do that? Well, you need A. Any idea what A is? Activity. You need people doing stuff, okay? You multiply that, that gets amplified by Q. Anybody? Quality. So it's got to be good stuff, right? If it's a ton of activity, but it's not good, you're not going to get effective or efficient. But you divide all that by T. Anybody? Training. No. Time. If it takes forever, then you're not going to get a lot of that activity. Now, this is the hardest one. You divide all that by D. Anybody? Distractions, right? If you distract your sales organization by just a bunch of new stuff or a bunch of technology or a bunch of this or a bunch of that, you're going to get distractions. They're funny people, right? You got to be careful. And so this is what you chase mentally as a sales enablement leader. Now, we've done a lot of research here. We're on our 4th year of studying sales enablement. That's why we ultimately came up with the idea of building the book, because there are some really common themes of what good looks like. And one of the common themes is, what are they really focusing on? Now, again, there's, as you can imagine, this discipline popping up so fast. Almost 80% of organizations have some level of an enablement function. You get many different flavors of it. There's not a thing out there 3 years ago that said exactly the 101 of building a sales enablement function. These things happened organically and happened fast. But the thing that threaded around success that we saw was training services, coaching services, enablement technology, and content. These 4 things were a pervasive trend in not only the sales enablement organizations, but the ones that were successful. So you're seeing a large amount of sales enablement organizations today. And again, interesting or important is, are they more successful than the ones that don't have it? And the answer is yes, but here is the thing. The recent study that we are seeing, we're seeing a little bit of dip in part of that. Partially that's why we think, because it's exploded so fast that you're starting to see some maturity with the ones that have been out there a couple years, but the ones that are popped up fast haven't quite hit their stride yet, so it's dragging down some of the numbers. Okay, now, I want to talk about some 4 things that we see sales enablement doing, and we see strategies in general that are driving success inside of selling organizations. Now, we've already talked about some of these, so I'm hoping that as I go through each one of these, you'll understand why we are seeing this as a big trend. Number 1, this idea of a value engineer. Salespeople should be considered engineers, engineers of value, okay? Not just people asking questions and getting good answers, but they're actually value engineers. That's hard to do. Why? Because talent needs to be thought differently. What a sales professional looked like yesterday is not what is going to be required for tomorrow. I got some data to show you some of that. And finally, what used to be a differentiator, remember that the SRP matrix where the one said process and went from random to, where I used to say, yeah, like formal process now is, that used to be your big differentiator. Oh, we got to put a methodology and we're all operating on the same. That now is required as a circuit breaker for success, because as things change, as you're asking them to do more, as they need to evolve, they have to operate together. If you are an individual autonomy, if you're a lone wolf in terms of a single individual, and that's what you're counting on, you're not going to find success. And finally, there's this enormous amount of technology, tons of technology out there now trying to solve the sales equation. It's really important to deploy a thoughtful strategy around this, and so we'll talk about that. Okay, so let's go for the first one. I've mentioned this before. I'll give you a little bit of framework for it, but I've already talked about this. You used to show up, you used to ask needs and sell a solution. That was great. Now, you got to show up and understand needs, but you got to really mentally enter your customer or your client's world. You have to, as a salesperson, think about what's the relationship between my customer and their customers? What's actually going on there? Is there anything I can learn about that could better inform my next conversation? What's going on with their competition? What's going on with their growth drivers, with their differentiation, with their employees? What's happening in their world that provides me context? Pepsi did the same thing. They realized, well, they want to go to Latin America. Okay, I can now broker some capabilities. I can, for value drivers, find parts of my company that have nothing to do with me selling soda, but bring demographic data into a conversation. That's a mindset shift. It takes capability, it takes muscle, it takes sometimes technology, content, hard to do. But there's 4 value drivers that you can think about as you enter that client world. There is what unrecognized problems are my customers not thinking about? What about opportunities they don't see? Anticipated solutions they're not really thinking through? Or what other capabilities can I bring to bear? We spend a lot of time with our clients taking this value driver concept against this notion of a client's world across this dimension and getting salespeople to think differently about their next interaction. What ROI can you bring to the table? What slight conversation can you have that's different than just selling a product or asking a question? Right? That is the future. Second thing, in order to do that, we believe talent needs to look a little different. One of the businesses we bought over the last couple of years, we've integrated, Miller Heiman has integrated 6 different businesses together. And one of them was this company from IBM we bought called Talent Analytics. And essentially, it's a big analytics business with tons of assessments, okay? Millions and millions of assessments. And you start going through all these assessments, start kind of filtering through it, you start seeing a trend that was like, that is really interesting. And that is the traits of high-performing salespeople. Now, if I were to tell you that, and I'm being really general here, to say like this is your predominantly a successful person, but I took all the traits and put them into 2 categories, EQ and IQ. That simple. EQ, think about this as persuasion, relationship, emotional intelligence kind of stuff, right? So it's like building relationships. That was the predominant trait in successful salespeople of the past. I can connect with you, I understand how to navigate situations, and I've got great EQ. That was a really handy thing to have. Over here, doesn't mean IQ wasn't important, it just wasn't the dominant trait of success, all right? Analytical skills, problem solving, learning agility. Can I learn things really, really quickly? That really, again, important, but not the dominant trait. What we've started to see is a shift where actually in a world where engagement is a lot less, it's not about providing information, it's about providing inspiration. It's about providing a perspective to a client. It's about entering their world, understanding what they're trying to do, getting insights, getting data, getting ROI analysis, bringing that to a table, having a conversation with the client, living in a world where it's a lot more technology rich with data all around me. IQ becomes an important trait. Again, it's not the whole thing, and we're not saying that that is the single thing you need now. But it's important now as sales environments have become more sophisticated. So that shift is happening. As part of how we work with our clients to assess talent, we take their high performers and we understand what makes them click and kind of model that from this is the kind of people you want to hire and this is the kind of things you want to think about development. There's kind of 4 categories, pretty basic stuff that anyone would understand. How they execute, right? Their focus, their persuasion, their responsibility, their discipline. That's important for salespeople, discipline, right? Their motivation, right? Their confidence level. Are they competitive or not? Those are important traits. Interaction, right? Are they networker, individualizer, work in team environments? And the one that is starting to fire off the most success is this idea of this cognition, the way they're thinking, the way they process. Do they learn quickly? If you give them an ROI analysis, if you provide them content that they should provide a client, if you help them thinking through a situational fluency of a certain discussion you're going to have and you want to add perspective, can they understand that? Can they process that quickly? And can they translate that to a really impactful conversation? That's an important trait now. It's just something we're seeing being more and more important. Not the whole thing by any means, and please don't take that. It's just becoming another important part of the equation. That is why you see more STEM backgrounds entering sales than ever before. You're seeing more people with STEM backgrounds entering sales. And that's why in some of the research you'll actually see that acquiring talent's harder because now it's more competitive to find people with this type of mix. And actually getting someone from start to finish taking 9 months, hard to do. Then you got onboarding, right? So it's just the decisions are a lot more, serious related to your recruiting, okay? You got another question. Where did the research come from? It's CSO insights. Just kidding. Yes.
So there's my perfect person.
Where? Oh, yeah, hard to find. Yeah, right.
Right. But what about the team that has the mix of these talents? Right. More likely to find that.
You repeat the question just so everybody can hear?
Yeah, you should repeat.
You mind repeating?
So this looks like the perfect person.
Yeah, having a
the
big mix,
persona
a good
or,
mix.
The profile. But how about putting that together as a team?
Yeah, so all
Right.
that matters. So I guess I'm not even sure you'll find someone with all this stuff. This was my attempt to say these are the different categories, these 4 categories of traits, of talent, and here are some of the traits underneath each category of which you got to measure and monitor. I would never say that it's perfect to have in one situation. Actually, what's perfect is to understand who your high performers are and what mix they have, and then say, okay, now that is it, because they're already working in that team and that culture. Because your point is, which is a great one, culture matters too in terms of the team environment you work on, in the culture of your clients, all that stuff. So it's contextualized. It needs to be contextualized for sure. The thing I wanted you to walk away with is to say that there's an extra category of traits that we're starting to see become important. And that's this idea of this cognitive thinking. Okay, process maturity. This goes back to that thing that was going left to right in the SRP matrix around your process. A lot of people think about the process as training. Okay, well, there's a big difference. I want to be clear about this. There are process and methodology, and then there are skills. And a lot of people mix these things up. There are process, which is what are the things that I need to think about and go do to be successful. So if I'm chasing a deal, there's 5 people involved in making that decision. Who are they? What do they think about us? What are their win results? What mode are they in? I got to think about all those different things. What don't I know? Who haven't I got to? And there's a huge list of things that I could go do next. A methodology helps you figure out what is the best leverage of the next 3 things I should go do, okay? But you need skills to go do those things. It might say, yeah, you should go get to the economic, or the person who makes the decision, you should go get to that person. Great. I gotta go pick up the phone. I gotta make that call. I gotta convince them to meet with me. I gotta prepare for that. I gotta ask questions. I gotta respond to objections. Skills. So when I talk about process excellence, what I'm really talking about is having the methodology that the entire business has the mindset and operates under. Okay, that's process. But you gotta have the skills, obviously, that you invest over time to make sure that works at an optimized level. Think about our individual rep working at an autonomy level versus having organizational execution. Our research at CSO Insights would suggest when you have organizational execution, 23% more successful. I'll share, I haven't seen the pull me off the stage yet thing. So I'll share a quick story that in my world, it gave me this real big understanding that what this means to have organizational execution. My first big, I started my career at Accenture, worked there for a ton of time, and then first big, I didn't want to just consult it, I wanted to actually do it. So I took a sales leader job at Mercer. Mercer's, actually I may have a colleague in here from my old Mercer days, I'm not sure, I thought I saw somebody. But it is a big $5 billion-ish professional services business across lots of different line of businesses. And it was a sales leader job, and it was a big transformation. So we got to roll out a whole bunch of changes from comp plans to new roles, technology, and there was methodology and execution as part of this. And we rolled it all out to 6,000 people, and literally the last program that we ran and big rollout was in Asia. We came back in 2008, October. Come back, boom, economy goes down, literally. And a third of our business were assets under management, which meant really bad news. So all of the value of a third of our business goes down overnight. And so we're in the room and we're thinking, well, what are we gonna do? What should we do? And everyone's coming up with ideas. A lot of them are stupid. Let's start a bankruptcy practice. That's not smart, you know. You can just start a practice. But literally, I said, I got an idea. Let's do this. I was a new guy in the room, newer. Let's outsell everybody. Let's just do that. I mean, we just made this massive investment. We've transformed everything. We've said it was important to all of them. And now we're up against the wall. Only thing we do next year is outsell everybody. You can imagine these technicians in the room, right? They're like, this kid's an idiot. That's not a strategy. Sales is not a strategy. So they told me elegantly that was not a good idea. I didn't say anything. I was like, okay, apparently not a good idea. The conversation ends. The CEO says, you know what? I've heard nothing but let's outsell everybody. So 2009 strategy is sales excellence. We're going to outsell everybody. Looked at me and was like, got to make this happen. I was like, got it. And so 2009 happens. It's March. We're right into the year. Big test comes. Huge RFP. Fortune 5 company. This thing would be game changing for us. We're not the incumbent. So the team fills out all this. Any actuaries in here? This is important because I'll make fun of you. All right, I want to be careful. All right, this is good. I'm giving me freedom here. 1, 2, 3. Okay, worst people ever, right? I mean, these are like totally nerds of nerds. I mean, these guys were really into the details, and they filled out, I kid you not, the RFP response was in the 700-page range. The presentation to go in there was 120-ish slides, all right? And it had density that you would mind-boggling. Now, this is a good thing about it, incredibly smart, right? These people are brilliant. And they pulled me at the deal at the last minute where we're gonna go in and present this thing. The next morning, we're meeting at night in the hotel room. They showed me all the stuff, and I was like, no way are we going in with this. I said, our process, our execution, our methodology says, and we all believed in, that we know nothing about this client. We've been able to share no insights. We're just following a process. And we are not going to do this. So what I think we should do, they gave us 3 hours. I think we should start the meeting and say, thanks for inviting us, but we're not going to waste your time. And we would like to give you all of the time back unless you would like to have an opportunity to engage in us so we can learn more about you and we can share some things that we think matter, and then we'll come back at another time and present what we actually think will move your needle. And they looked at me like, no way are we doing that. No way are we doing that. So big argument, go to bed. And at the time we had the, it wasn't Blackberries, but it doesn't matter. It was not as cool as our phones now, put it that way. And I just remember seeing the emails where they escalated right to the CEO, email. This guy's crazy, he's insane. This process sucks. They don't know how to sell in our environment. We're different, our industry's different. He doesn't get it, you can imagine. All these different things. She doesn't respond to any of them. So I wake up in the morning. And I said, guys, I'm not gonna do this. I'm sticking to our process. This is how we're gonna actually make a difference. So they said, I tell you what, you do that and you're fired. I was like, all right, fine. Start the meeting. I literally believed something different was gonna happen, okay? But this is actually what happened. So we start the meeting, and oh God, I'll never forget. So there's it's like a theater almost, and they're all in the back, and they're watching us, and we have this like platform, and we're presenting, and we've got this massive deck in 3 hours to just rip through it. And I start the meeting, and I say exactly what I said I would say, like to the word. And this one guy in the back, didn't know he was, laughing his rear end off, laughing at me. And then the head of procurement stands up, which just furious, and say, wait, are you telling me you're not presenting? And I said, no, I'd love to engage with you and spend the time together, but no, we're not just gonna walk you through our presentation. And he said, then get out. Shit, that's actually not what I thought was gonna happen. I thought the other thing was gonna happen, where they'd be like, well, what do you wanna know? And like, let's talk a little bit. None of that part happened. So everything I thought was bad happened. Like literally, we get kicked out of the room. The people I was with were unbelievably fired up. And so I'm on a plane home. Now, I hadn't thought through any of this, really. So it's true, like my wife is pregnant with her first kid, all right? And I'm on the way home, it's Thursday, and I'm thinking, shit, this is not a good environment to get a job, like not good. But I'm kind of stressing, it builds up a little bit more. Emails start showing up about how I screwed up. Still no response from anybody. And I put everything down, didn't want to deal with it over the weekend, to try to like survive. Wake up in the morning on Monday, and I was headed to New York. I land on New York, and sure enough, CEO in my inbox, come see me. I'm like, damn. So I get there, and I figured, Jay, done, like done, like no job. So I show up, I open the door, she comes in super nice. I'm like, okay. And you know, it's like, that's great. She's like, you know what, congratulations. I just wanted to spend a couple seconds with you to say congratulations. And I had no idea what was going on. So I was like, whoa. Yeah, totally good, right? And so did you see all those emails? And she said, you don't know what I'm talking about. And I said, I have no idea. She's like, well, the CFO of that top 5 of that company was the guy in the back of the room laughing. And he called her to thank her on Friday for the courage to not pitch on something so important to them without knowing their business, and has completely redesigned the process in asking and begging if we can come back, and where he will take control of the process on an overall deal. So long story short, we did all that and won it, and it represented, in that year we grew sales 6%, our competitor dropped 20%, and the point about process execution is, on my way out, she looked at me and said, this is gonna work. I think it's gonna work. And I said, yes, as long as we all operate with principles as an organization. And she's like, I got it. And it was that minute I knew the power of organizational execution versus at times it feels right, but individual autonomy. And getting to organizational execution really matters. Okay, long story, but it is what it is. Okay, I just wanted to share that. Okay, final one. Digital enablement. So digital enablement, like it's crazy time out there. There's so much stuff. Everyone's chasing digital solutions to do one kind of primary thing. We bucket all sellers' time into kind of 2 things, non-selling time and selling time, tedious versus ingenuity. And tedium is the non-selling time. Tons of data about this. Salesforce has our research. We have our research. It's all directionally correct, plus or minus 1% or 2, which suggests the vast majority of time people are spending is not actually selling, not actually providing perspective, not actually in the client's world, not actually being a value engineer. They're doing other things. So what do you get? Something that looks like this, which I'm sure you guys have seen versions of this, right? And this is probably even old. I mean, I don't know. Like a few years ago, there was 100 of these things. Now there's over 500. They keep popping up. Now, they're all trying to do the same thing, which is really around making my job better and easier. Now, I want to focus on one thing, which is we're here this week. I want to talk about CRM for a second. We believe in the one slice of CRM, of digital enablement, we think there's a evolution coming. I think there's a big change coming in this space. A little dicey given where we are this week, but let's go through it. Let's talk about the history of this thing, all right? CRM, where did it start? With the Rolodex, okay? Before any technology, of course people had contacts and stuff that they were actually tracking. They just didn't use a computer. And it was fine. The people that did it were human beings, all right? Then what happened? CRM 2.0. Love the innovation. Siebel, ACT, right? They package software. Let's actually have something that you could screw inside these really expensive servers that you own. We'll customize the heck out of it. It'll cost us so much money, but it'll give you a pipeline. It'll give you transparency into the black box called sales. And so that was great, and it was really successful. Problem is what? Cost too much, right? You can't put all the stuff in the server, so who invents what? Salesforce comes and says, oh, I got an idea. Let's put it up in the cloud and charge it, a per fee. And you don't need servers and it's super expensive. Just turn it on. Great idea. It worked, solving a technical architecture problem. Not solving anybody? Process, person, what's in it for me? Like, not fun to use kind of thing, right? Like, got to be careful. So what we end up having is a situation where we're very much in a CRM is working. It's providing great transparency. Adoption's not quite, people are still not quite there, but it's getting better. But it's still built and thought of for the leader, for the manager. And there's been great innovation lately around some AI stuff that we'll talk about in a second. But it's still, like, I'm yet to find the person that says, would not have won that deal if it was not for my CRM system. You will find ops leaders and sales leaders and say, I wouldn't come up with the forecast if it wasn't for that, or I wouldn't understand, X, Y, and Z about my organization if it wasn't for that. But inside the deal, it still lacks the magic for the salesperson, okay? And we think that's going to change. So we think that, again, what matters in a seller? What actually makes, what changes results that impact the entire organization? What impacts results is behavior, are the things I choose to go do. I'm going to make this call. I'm going to have this meeting. I'm going to communicate a certain way. I'm going to provide perspective, value, insights. Behavior changes results. So what facilitates behavior? Like we said earlier in the process part, right? How you operate as an organization, like I gave my example. That was a very specific process. The behavior is, in our model, we understand the needs and add perspective. At the time, we called it insights, before we pitch our deal. That's at a macro level. That was a silly example, but a big example of kind of what that means. So CRM 4.0, which we think is coming, is a completely different engagement model with the user. Doesn't mean we're not going to have pipeline anymore or forecast, but inside of the deal, the user interface of your CRM will be contextualized based on how you sell your process. The what's in it for me as a salesperson is it augments how I behave. It helps me think about what to do next. That's why I want to use it. Not to fill out a form, not to fill out this thing out, but because I want to understand what to do next. And again, there's a lot of people doing things here, including ourselves, but obviously you got things like Einstein that's popping up that kind of works around the deal a little bit with forecasts and opportunity scoring. But ultimately, there's a lot of AI and a lot of things that are going to help re-engineer the user interface between a seller and a CRM system. Sales enablement will play a huge role in understanding where this market goes. We believe that. Okay. So I'm getting the hook. These are your 4 things that the biggest companies, best companies in the world, I don't know about biggest, but best companies in the world are investing in. I really hope this helped. I enjoyed the time, and I appreciate it. Do I have questions, or are we doing questions?
I think we will have people come up to you directly. Let's just give a big hand.
Okay,
That's
thanks.
incredible.
Sorry.